This video is kindly brought to you by Squarespace, the all-in-one platform to create a beautiful online presence. Hi, my name's Janelle and welcome back to Rosary Apparel. In this video, I'm going to be sharing some clothing projects that you can make if you're a complete beginner. Some of these projects are the very first items of clothing I ever made myself when I first started sewing. So hopefully the projects I'll be sharing in this video will inspire you to have a go at making your own clothes, even if you are a complete beginner. First up, let me show you how to make this amazing tiered midi skirt. For this skirt, we're going to be working with 3 different panels or tiers. The first panel will be made up of 2 rectangles that are double your waist measurement divided by 2 by about 35 centimeters or 14 inches. The second panel is made up of 1 rectangle that is 3 times your waist measurement by 30 centimeters or 12 inches. And the third panel is also just 1 rectangle that measures 4 times your waist measurement by 30 centimeters or 12 inches as well. Each panel is slightly larger than the last, which will create each tier of the skirt. Start by cutting out all the different panel pieces. For panel 2 and 3, you may need to stitch multiple rectangles together to get the correct length like I did. Once each panel is gathered up, you'll barely be able to notice the seams, so you don't need to worry about that. You'll also need to cut 4 pocket pieces using my free pocket template that you can find a link to down in the description of this video. Start by overlocking or zigzag stitching the curved edge of the pocket pieces to prevent them from fraying. Then with right sides together, place the pocket pieces onto the panel 1 rectangles, approximately 15 centimeters or 6 inches from the top edge, and then stitch them together like this. As a rule, I like to overlock or zigzag stitch after each seam to neaten up the inside of the garment and to prevent the fabric from fraying. Next, with right sides together, place the 2 panel 1 rectangles together and stitch them together around the pockets like this. Then give the seams a good press and pop this panel to the side for later. Next, take the pieces that you cut out for the third panel and start by stitching them together to create a rectangle that's approximately 4 times your waist measurement. Then set your sewing machine to the longest possible setting and sew 2 rows of gathering stitches along the top edge of your rectangle. Repeat this process exactly the same for your panel 2 rectangles. Next, take panel 3 and gently pull on the top 2 threads of the gathering rows to gather the fabric up until it's the same length as your panel 2 rectangle. Sewing 2 rows of gathering stitches helps to make this part a lot easier and also makes the gathering look a lot more even. Once gathered all the way, fold the panel 2 rectangle in half twice to quarter it and place a pin into the fabric at each quarter point. Do the same for the gathered panel 3. This will make pinning the panels together a lot easier and will also help to distribute the gathering a lot more evenly as well. Then with right sides together, pin and stitch panel 3 to the bottom edge of panel 2, matching the quartered pins together. Once stitched in place, give the gathers a good press with your iron. Next, with right sides together, fold the 2 panels together and stitch them together along the side like this. And then gather the fabric up until it's approximately the same size as the panel 1 rectangle. Then with right sides together, pin and stitch the tiered skirt that we've just made to the panel 1 rectangle. Next, measure some elastic that's approximately 2.5 centimeters or an inch wide around your waist and cut a piece that overlaps slightly but is still comfortable. Fold and press the top edge of the skirt in by about 1 centimeter or half an inch, and then fold the top edge again, making sure that it covers the width of the elastic. Stitch this folded edge in place, making sure to leave an opening to be able to thread the elastic through. Then use a safety pin or a bodkin, like I am, and thread the elastic into the casing we just made, making sure to gather up the fabric as you thread the elastic through. Once thread all the way through, overlap the two ends of elastic and stitch them together with a zigzag stitch like this. Then sew the opening closed. And your skirt should now have a nicely elasticated waistband and should be looking a little something like this. Now all that's left to do is hem the bottom edge of the skirt. I did this by overlocking or zigzag stitching the raw edge of the fabric. Then I pressed the bottom edge in by about 1 centimeter or half an inch, and then stitched the folded edge in place. And your lovely tiered midi skirt is complete. Before we get into the next project, let's take a moment to talk about the sponsor of this video. This video is very kindly sponsored by Squarespace, the all-in-one platform to run your business and launch your passion project. If you want to get into making and selling your own products, then I definitely recommend you go and check out Squarespace. On Squarespace, you can create your dream website all by yourself, and trust me, if I'm able to do it, anybody can. You simply select from a range of beautifully designed templates, and once you've picked your template, you can then customize it completely to suit your brand and style, and you can change everything from the overall layout of the website to all the fun things like the fonts and colors with just a few clicks, no knowledge or background encoding needed whatsoever. Something that I really like about Squarespace is just how easy it is to add new products to your store. On my Squarespace website, I sell my sewing patterns, but I recently came out with a whole range of sewing kits, and what I really love about Squarespace is just how easy it is to add new products to your website. They have this super handy duplicate button, which pretty much just means you get to copy an original listing and then just change it out to suit your new product, which just saves so much time and allows me to focus on the more creative side of my business. So if you'd like to create a beautiful online presence of your own, then head to squarespace.com for a free trial so you can try it out for yourself and see just how easy it is. And when you're ready to launch your website, head to squarespace.com/rosaryapparel for 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Thanks Squarespace for being an amazing supporter of this channel. Next, let me show you how to make this super simple top. When I first started sewing, this project was one of the first pieces of clothing I ever made for myself. Start by taking a t-shirt that you love and that you also like the fit of, and fold it in half. Next, take your fabric. For reference, I'm using some non-stretch cotton that I'll have a link to in the description, and place the folded edge of the t-shirt onto the fold of the fabric. Then take a water erasable pen or some tailor's chalk and mark out the shape of the t-shirt directly onto your fabric. trace around the armhole shape, but for this project we're going to be skipping the sleeves completely. Then cut out the shape you've just traced, and you should have a bodice piece that looks like this. The t-shirt I'm using is a little bit snug fitting, so I decided to add about 2.5 centimeters or an inch to the bottom of my bodice like this, and a little extra for hemming. I also enlarged the neck and armhole edges by about an inch as well. Use this bodice piece as a template to cut another out, and you should now have two identical bodice pieces that look like this. One is going to be the front of the top and one will be the back. Take the one that you'd like to make the back and measure and mark 10 centimeters or 4 inches from the neck edge along the fold, and also measure a point along the neck edge approximately 2.5 centimeters or an inch in. Then draw out and cut a curve between these measurements that looks a little something like this. Once folded out, your back piece will look like this. Next, we need to make some bias binding. For bias binding, you need to cut strips of fabric along the bias or diagonally against the straight grain of the fabric like this. To make the binding, you're going to need a bias binder maker. The one I'm using is a size 12, but I recommend using a bigger size if you're a beginner. Cut out a strip that is the width recommended for your bias binding maker. All up for this project, you're going to need about 2.5 meters or 2.5 yards of binding. Then place the strips of fabric into the bias binder maker, which will then fold the fabric into binding. And make sure to press the folds as you move the fabric through the maker. Next, with right sides together, pin the bias binding to the back curve along the first fold crease. Then stitch the bias binding into position, again stitching into the same fold crease. Tuck the binding to the wrong side of the bodice back and press in place. This part is a little bit fiddly, but bias binding has a bit of stretch to it, which should make the binding sit nicely around the curve without creasing the fabric too much. Then stitch the bias binding in place, enclosing the raw edges of the fabric. Next, with right sides together, place the bodice front onto the bodice back and stitch them together along the shoulder seams. Then take more of your bias binding and fold it onto the raw edge of the neck opening, making sure to leave a tail of binding at each end that is about 30 centimeters or 8 inches long. Again, this part is a little bit tricky, but if your bias binding is wider, it'll make this process a lot easier. Fold the ends of the bias binding in by about 1 centimeter or half an inch to enclose all the raw edges of the fabric to the inside. Then sew the folded bias binding in place, making sure that you're catching the folded binding on the other side of the fabric as you sew. And then all the raw edges along the neck curve should be nicely enclosed like this, and you should also have some cute ties at the back as well. With right sides together, flip the bodice front onto the bodice back and stitch them together along the sides like this. Then fold the bias binding onto the raw edges of the armholes exactly as we did for the neck opening. Once again, fold the end of the bias binding in by about 1 centimeter to hide the raw edges. Then lastly, hem the bottom edge of the top. And your super simple tie-up top is complete. And as an added bonus, this top can be worn either way for a different look. Lastly, let me show you how to make a shirred puff sleeve dress. To make this dress, you will need just 4 rectangles of fabric. The first 2 rectangles will be your bust measurement by however long you'd like your dress to be. I made mine 100 centimeters or 39.5 inches. These 2 rectangles will make up the main part of the dress. Next, measure your shoulder from underarm to underarm. The next 2 rectangles for this dress will be this arm measurement times 2 by however long you'd like your sleeves to be. I made mine 50 centimeters or 19.5 inches. These rectangles will obviously be the sleeves of the dress. Cut out all of these rectangles in your fabric. For my dress, I'm using some beautiful linen that I'll have linked to in the description of this video. Also, like the skirt I shared earlier in this video, cut out 4 pocket pieces using my free template, and then overlock or zigzag stitch the curved edges to prevent them from fraying. Pin and stitch the pockets approximately 40 centimeters or 15 3/4 inches from the top of both dress rectangles. Then with right sides together, place one of the dress rectangles onto the other, matching the pockets together, and stitch them together along the sides, remembering to stitch around the pockets as you sew. Next, hem the top and bottom raw edges of the tube we've just created. Then using a water erasable pen or some tailor's chalk, mark to where you'd like the shirring to sit along the bust of the dress. I've marked approximately 25 centimeters or 10 inches from the top of the dress for mine. Now it's time to start shirring. I've shared how to set up your sewing machine for shirring in another video, so definitely check that out if you've never tried it before. But basically you're going to need to hand wind your bobbin with some shirring elastic, and then you're going to have to set up your machine for shirring. To make it difficult, each machine is different, but for my machine, I find setting the stitch length to 3.5 when it's normally 2.5, and setting the tension to 6 when it's usually 4 are the best settings for shirring. Then simply start shirring around your rectangle tube, and as you sew, the shirring elastic gets stitched into the fabric, making it elasticated. When sewing multiple rows of shirring, it's best to line up the presser foot with your previous row to keep the stitching nice and straight. The more you stitch, the more your fabric will start to gather. Once you've finished all those rows of shirring, you should now have something that looks like this. Next, use your iron to steam the shirring to make it shrink a little bit more, and then give all the shirring and gathered fabric a good press. Next, take the 2 sleeve rectangles we cut out earlier and fold them in half with right sides together and stitch them together along the side edge. Then hem both ends by folding in about 1 centimeter or half an inch twice. Stitch the folded edge in place, making sure to leave a small opening to be able to thread some elastic through. Measure out some thin elastic the size of your arm where the sleeve will sit and the size of your shoulder from underarm to underarm. My elastic measured approximately 25 centimeters or 10 inches for the arm and 45 centimeters or 18 inches for the shoulder. Then again, using a safety pin or a bodkin, thread the elastic through the casings we made before, putting the longer pieces of elastic in one end and the shorter pieces of elastic in the other. Stitch the 2 ends of elastic together with a zigzag stitch, and then stitch the small opening closed. And you should now have 2 puffy sleeves that look like this. Pin the sleeves to the dress at the side seam, attaching about 20 centimeters or 8 inches of the sleeve to the dress, and then stitch them in place. And your shirred puff sleeve dress is complete. Not only is this dress beautiful, but it's also super comfy, and once you've finished this project, you're going to be an expert at shirring. So I hope you enjoyed this video and that it's inspired you to have a go at making your own clothes. If you do have a go at any of the projects I've shared, then I would love to see them, so be sure to tag me at Rosary Apparel when you share your photos on Instagram. And if you did enjoy this video, it would mean a lot to me if you could give it a like and subscribe to this channel for more sewing videos like this one. Have a lovely day and thanks for watching!